Hello there. Thank you for taking a few minutes to watch this video or listen to this audio. My name is Joe Martin. I'm the pastor of First Baptist Church in Toledo, Washington. We've been talking about relearning church after a long period of having to adjust to all kinds of things. And today I want to talk to you about the need of relearning compassion. Relearning compassion. Relearning the art of caring. Sometimes people ask the question when they've gone through a really, really terrible time, where was God? But maybe the better question would be, where was the church? God was supposed to be present through the church. And sometimes that we dismally and desperately fail at this, but we are to be his resident body in this place. Right now, in our land, there is a crisis of compassion. It seems that we've traded compassion for cruelty. A professed religious country has made cruelty and crassness and cutting words acceptable from the highest to the smallest Facebook feed. From the church house to the White House, cruel condemnation toward others seems to be sport. It seems to be all about somebody owning one person or the other or blowing somebody up. In times of hatred and turmoil toward opponents, Jesus shared a different message and a different spirit. Jesus reveals to us the heart of compassion. Jesus was moved with compassion throughout his life. He groaned within himself. Jesus was fully God and fully man, and yet he felt the full range of human emotion and acted accordingly. Jesus was going through all the cities and villages and teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every kind of disease and every kind of sickness. And seeing the people, he felt compassion for them because they were distressed and dispirited like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Therefore beseech the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into his harvest." In another place, beyond Matthew 9, it says in Matthew 14:13, "Now when Jesus heard about John, he withdrew from there in a boat to a secluded place by himself. And when the people heard of this, they followed him on foot from the cities. And when they went ashore, he saw a large crowd, and he felt compassion for them, and he healed their sick." Jesus had an inner life of compassion. You will never have a life like his until you have a heart like his. And, we are expected to live like him. And so we have to cultivate and ask him for grace to have hearts of compassion. What is the church to do? What John said in 1 John 2:6, he said, "The one who says he abides in him ought himself to walk in the same manner as he walked." But what does it mean to be compassionate? Well, let's look at the definition of compassion. It really comes from this idea of the word, the inner life. It says the bowels of compassion. That is, you feel deeply sympathy or pity. But it's more than that. The Greek word literally means to suffer together with other people. It's, researchers in emotional research say it is defined as a feeling that arises when you are confronted with another's suffering and you feel motivated on some level to relieve that suffering. 1 John 3:17 says, "But whoever has the world's goods and sees his brother in need and closes his heart against him," that would be the opposite of compassion, "how does the love of God abide in him?" Compassion is the essence of loving your neighbor as yourself. You can imagine the pain and you want to soothe it. You suffer together with them. Now, what is the history of compassion? Sometimes because we live in a kind of post-Christian culture where compassion, there's a lot of hospitals and nonprofits and even organizations called compassion. But the history of compassion is quite different than you might think. The culture that the early church started in was very different. The Romans saw compassion as a weak, bleeding-hearted stuff. This history of compassion is so different from what we have come to expect out of people. Someone wrote, basically, the ancient Rome was a society that was completely revolved around war, and where compassion was considered a vice rather than a virtue. The Romans saw gladiatorial contests not as a form of decadence, but as a cure for decadence. You see, and decadence to the Romans in the first century had little to do with sexual behavior or a lack of decent work ethic, but a lack of military style honor and aggression and soldierly virtues. To a Roman, compassion was a detestable vice, which was considered both decadent and feminine. Watching people and animals slaughtered brutally in the arena was seen as a way to keep the civilian population from this weakness because they didn't see combat personally. The writer goes on to say, could our society be sliding toward those Roman attitudes in a bizarre sort of way? One could think. I often think that America suffers with an empathy gap. We are simply not encouraged to put ourselves in the place of others for all kinds of reasons. We hear leaders say, don't be sheep, don't be pathetic, don't be wimpy. Jesus described himself as a sheep going to the slaughter. It is said that Christians conquered Rome, though, with compassion, that great empire. It says in the early years, plagues tragically hit the Roman Empire, and in 165 AD, during the reign of Marcus Aurelius, a plague swept through the Roman Empire, to which the mortality rate was so massive that Aurelius wrote of the caravans and wagons hauling out the dead. But one of the church fathers said Christians sought ways to help during the plagues, as seen by the letter of Bishop Dionysius of Alexandria. To those who had nursed the sick and to those who were giving their lives in doing so, this is what his letter said. Most of our brothers showed unbounded love and loyalty, never sparing themselves and thinking only of one another. Heedless of danger, they took charge of the sick, attending to their every need and ministering to them in Christ, and with them departed this life serenely and happy, for they were infected by others with the disease, drawing on themselves the sickness of their neighbors and cheerfully accepting their pains. Many, in nursing and curing others, transferred their death to themselves and died in their stead. The best of our brothers lost their lives, and in this manner a number of presbyters, deacons, and laymen, winning high commendation, so that death in this form, the result of a great piety and strong faith, seems in every way equal to martyrdom. It conquered the hearts of the Roman people because they took care of them. They showed compassion. Now, later, under Constantine, we began to see the militarized version of Christianity. But those early years when Christianity was most vibrant and most like Christ, as 1 John says, the one who says he abides in him ought himself to walk in the same manner as he walked. That shifted everything. You see, church ultimately has been the source of compassion more than any other movement for good. The church has done this. You have to remember that social Darwinism, the survival of the fittest, whether it's economics or physically, does not promote compassion. The rule of rising expectation found by the free market teachers, it didn't come out of Christianity. Church does compassion. It's what we do. But it's often shirked. It's often replaced or watered down with something cooler or easier, because let's talk about the hard work of compassion. It's more than sympathy. It's more than empathy. It's suffering along with people. There's a lot of fake compassion these days, a lot of performance activism and compassion. It does nothing really but draw attention to itself. Facebook philanthropy. Jesus made this clear. He said, beware of practicing your righteousness before men to be noticed by them. Otherwise, you have no reward with your Father who is in heaven. He was saying, when you give to the poor, when you do something for people, don't sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and the streets, so that they may be honored by men. Truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. Your likes may be your reward. You know, when you give to the poor, he said, he didn't say if you give to the poor, do it out of compassion. There is that drought of compassion in our land. It is easy in our social media cocoons to weave realities of good and evil people, 100% good, 100% bad. There's an epidemic of otherings that has poisoned the minds of so many. Living with such binary thinking is both unloving and very much unlike Jesus. I mean, Jesus was called by his absolutist critics the friend of sinners. And he didn't just put up with sinners or such people as they called sinners. He loved them. He showed compassion for them. He did more than forgive them. He became forgiveness for them. Jesus made clear that the work he invites us to is hard work. It's the work of compassion. It's painful and it's costly. Remember what Jesus said in Matthew 25:34? He said, then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed of my Father. Inherit the kingdom prepared from you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, and thirsty and give you something to drink? And when did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? And the king will answer and say to them, truly I say to you, to the extent that you did it to the least of these brothers of mine, even the least of them, you did it to me. And then he will also say to those on his left, depart from me, accursed ones, into the eternal fire, which has been prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I was naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. Then they themselves will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry, thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not take care of you? Then he will answer them, truly I say to you, in the extent that you did not do it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did not do it to me. These will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal glory. Now you don't have to read very much between the lines that compassion is the distinction. Having the heart of Christ. Compassion is hard though. It's hard work. Compassion for the poor. Compassion for the outcast. Compassion for the sick or for the prisoner. For the homeless. For the young. For the old. For your enemies. Sometimes compassion for enemies is the hardest thing of all. Not to pay back is a central thing about Jesus' teaching. Remember what Jesus said in Luke 6:27, but I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. It's hard to do. That's hard work. The Bible tells us, and it warns us, really, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you along with all malice. And here's why. Because it hardens up your heart. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, same word as compassion. Compassionate toward one another. Forgiving each other, just as God in Christ Jesus has also forgiven you. Don't pay back. And also compassion toward the lost, toward people that don't know the Lord yet. Have compassion for them. They need your guidance, not your criticism, not your judgment. You know, Jesus said in Luke 15:4, what man among you, if he has 100 sheep and has lost one of them, does not leave the 99 and open the pasture and go after the one who is lost until he finds it? This is hard work. It's complicated. It's messy. It's not selective. It's very open-hearted. It takes, like one writer said, imagination. An imagination of what others might feel or be going through. Imagination of hurt, even for people who are difficult. The hurt that maybe drives them to be hurtful. The imagination of what God could do in someone's life under his work. Imagination, when we really think about somebody and we see them as human beings, Instead of turning them into like a label or a monster in our minds, compassion comes out of imagination. You see them as a human. You feel for them. You have God's heart for them. And you know what that leads to? That leads to affection or to love. Let me ask you something. Are you moved with the compassionate heart of Jesus? Are you moved out of your bubble to a place of really feeling and caring, the art of caring? Out of your safety into a place of doing something, giving something, being something for others. 1 John 3:16 says, we know love by this, that he laid down his life for us, and that we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. But whoever has the world's goods and sees his brother in need and closes his heart against him, like I said, the opposite of compassion, how does the love of God abide in him? Little children, here's what he says, let us not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth. And once again, remember 1 John, the one who says he abides in him ought to himself walk in the same manner as he has walked. This is who you are. And this is what we do together as his church. I'd like you to really think about this. And maybe you would have us pray for you. Pray I can grow in the compassion of Jesus for those around my life. We will, if you just check that little box as you watch this. Let me remind you, you can show compassion through giving, through a phone call, through suffering together with people in the middle of what they're going through. Don't be selective about it. Be open. And maybe ask us to pray that you can grow in compassion for Jesus, of the compassion of Jesus for those who are around your life. Thank you for watching. God bless you.